Hi guys, welcome to Go tutorial part 13. My name is Tensor from the Tensor Programming blog. And today we are going to set up the last few things that we need for our user module. So for the last, I guess, 8 or 9 tutorials, we've been working on this user login module that allows us to log in, log out, sign up, etc. So now we're finally going to finish it, and then in our next tutorial we're going to merge it with our other web app. So basically what we have to create is we need to create some form of function that allows us to query the database to make sure that we do not have multiple users who have the same user ID. We also need to create a session based on the unique user ID, and we need to create a query that allows us to query the database and pull out the entire user information based on the user's unique user ID. So let's get started here. We're going to do a lot of this in our data file here. So currently we are using a specific thing to create our database. So we're going to change this query a little bit so that we can, ensure that we do not get duplicate fields, and so that we can have our actual database look in a different way. So for example, in our first field here, in our unique user ID field, we want to say that this can never be null, so it'll never have an empty value, and it's going to be a unique value. So we also want to add not null to all of our other fields. And for our username, it's also going to be not null, but it's also going to be unique as well. And this basically means that we can't have multiple usernames with the same exact username. Our email is going to be not null, and it's not going to be unique, so a person with the same username can have multiple users if they want. And our password, of course, will be not null as well. Now at the end back here, we are also going to specify that our unique user ID is our primary key in this table. So we're actually just going to say primary key, and then we're going to throw in UUID. And what this will do is it will make sure that the way that our table is indexed is by our unique user ID. So we don't need to do anything else with this particular function. This will actually build the database in the way that we want. And as you can see here, we actually do not have our database, which is actually good. So if you are following along and you have a database already, make sure to delete it before you try to run this query, otherwise it will throw back an error because it'll try to create a table like this on top of the table that we already have. So now we need to edit our user exists function. So what we want to do is we want to edit it so that it throws back both a boolean and a string, and this string is going to be our unique user ID. The way this is going to work is we're going to come down here, and as you can see, we're selecting the username and password based on our username, but instead we want to select the unique user ID and password based on the username. And then we're going to return false if we have an error, and an empty string, because strings can't be nil in Go. Then after we scan in our what used to be our username, is now our unique user ID, so we can actually change this variable to UU to reflect its nature more. Now we scan in our unique user ID and our password down here in these variables, and then we check to see if our passwords are the same, so we compare them, the hashed password and the non-hashed password, and then we run this if statement, and we check to see if UU equals an empty string, and we're going to say if it does not equal an empty string, and if password is nil, then we are going to throw back true, and we're going to throw back our UU, and then finally at the end we're going to throw back an empty string. So if we go into our main.go file, and we could actually change the way that we are getting all this data here. So here we're running the user exists function, and this obviously is not going to work correctly, so we need to alter the way this works. Okay, so now we've changed this. We've added the variable b, which is our boolean, and if b is true, then we set our session up, and then we pass in a user struct with just the UUID in it. So the UUID we're getting back from our database from this function. So now if we go to our cookie.go file, we can actually look up here and we can see, okay, this is setting the username and the password, but now we're only passing in the UUID, so we want to edit it to reflect this. So now you can see here, we are encoding our unique user ID with this particular code, and we can actually come down here, change this, and let's actually change this string. So from username to UUID, change the username here and here as well. So now we can set up our session with our UUID, and we can actually get our UUID back with the getUsername function. which we should change the name to get UUID. So here's our get username function. And of course now it's called get UUID. And instead of username, we'll say UUID. And this is in our example page. So this is after our login has worked out. So we get our UUID, and then we need another function in here. And then we need to check and see if our UUID is empty or not. And if it isn't empty, then we're going to render a different struct. And let's call that struct U. U is going to equal the function that we're going to create here. And let's call this function get user from UUID. And we're going to pass in UUID into this to allow us to get it. So we're going to create this function in our data file. So this is going to be a query. And we're going to say function get user from UUID. Pass in the UUID string. And we're going to pass back a pointer to user. We're going to use the same two lines that we use in every single one of our data functions, and that is opening our database, assigning it to a variable, and then deferring the closing of the database till after the function finishes running. Now we need to create 6 different variables, so then we need to query the database. So we're going to say, okay, db query, select, and we're going to use star. So select star as in select the entire line, so the entire row, and then we concatenate UUID here. So we're going to select the entire row based on the UUID that we pass in through here. So now we do a little error checking, and if we have an error, we're just going to return an empty user. Then we iterate through our rows. We're only going to get back one row, but we need to iterate through each of them. So now we're scanning each of our variables. So it's going to be our unique user ID, then our first name, then our last name, then our username, email, and password. All of these are set up in the way that we've set up our table. So it goes unique user ID, first name, last name, username, etc. So you need to make sure that these actually match up with your actual table, so that you're actually getting the correct the correct variables back in the correct values. And then we are just going to return a user filled with these values. So as you can see here, we're passing back username as UN, first name is first name, etc., etc., etc. We're not passing back UU, but that's simply because we already have a unique user ID here, so we don't really need to pass it back. So in our main.go, now we're getting back U, and now we are rendering U into our internal file. We can actually go into our internal template here and say put in some of our other data, like for example first name. So this will actually display the user's name, the first name, then the last name, and it says what would you like to do today, and then it'll say our name is Harry Potter. So we can actually move this question mark to the end if we want. So this should work. Now we need to make it so that when the user signs up and they enter in the form value for username, they can't enter in a username which already exists in the database. So we already have made it so that our username value in our database is unique, which means that if somebody does enter in a new value, it won't overwrite the one that's already there. This doesn't stop a user from trying to sign up with a username that already exists. So let's create it. And this function is going to be called checkUser. We're going to pass in user string, and we're going to pass back a boolean. We're going to use the opening of the database lines that we were using before and the defer close. We're going to create one variable, which is a string. Then we are going to query our database and say select username from user, where username equals the user string that we've passed in here. So now we're going to scan back username. And then we're going to say if UN equals user, return true. Otherwise, return false. Alright, so now let's go into our main.go and actually implement this function. So we're going to put this right under our case post right here. So we're going to say if n, then we're going to call checkUser, and we're going to run r.format value, or form value rather. We're just going to call username in here directly. And then we're going to say if n equals true, then we set a message, and the string value is going to be username, and the message will say something like user already exists, please enter a unique username. And let's make this capital. And now we will redirect back to the sign up page so that we can see this error, and we will have a return statement so that we don't get a write header error as a result of this. Alright, so this should be the end of our actual user module. So let's actually take a look and let's give it a shot. So here's our login form. We don't currently have a database, so which means that we don't have any usernames and passwords to use. So let's create a username. We're going to call this user Tensor, and the first name is going to be John, last name Doe. Email is going to be test@test.com, Password 1234567 8. If we hit submit, it's saying the user already exists, which means that we've got a slight error. Alright, so we needed to go back and we needed to change this to false. And so the problem was that because we didn't have a database, it was throwing us an error, and then it kept saying that we already had the user already in the database, because it was trying to query the database that didn't exist. So now if we create a new user, so let's go to sign up, and let's call this user Metal Blaster, first name of Emily Dickinson, example at test.com, and now we've created a new user. So now if we type in Metal Blaster and the password, well, that didn't work. That was an undercase Metal Blaster. There we go. So now it comes in and it says, hello Metal Blaster, what would you like to do today, Emily Dickinson? So it shows us the name as well as the username. And if we check out the cookie, so here we have the storage browser, or the storage inspector on Firefox, and as you can see here, here is the cookie that has our unique user ID on it, and that's actually here, right here, in this encrypted value. And if we log out, this will be destroyed. So as you can see, session disappeared. Now if we log in as Tensor, now we have a new session ID. Alright guys, so I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I know I went a little fast. And now that we're finished our user module, in our next tutorial we're going to merge it with our other web app. And then from there we're going to build more functionality. I'm considering adding potentially doing some type of thing with WebSockets, probably like a chat room, something like that, adding it directly into our web app, just to show you how those work and go. Anyway, if you enjoyed this tutorial, please feel free to like and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to throw up a comment. And if you dislike this video, then of course, slam that thumbs down button as much as you want. Have a good night, guys.